Startup Festival is amazing. I just can't believe how well organised it is. I mean, it's like I'm in New York or London.
This is an area that's going to see so many good startups coming out of this area over the next 5 to 10 years for sure.
This is the perfect size, where you have some really great speakers and you also have so many interesting startups that are presenting and a really great whole entire floor to walk through.
for the second day of UX Tartu. I believe that you all came back after yesterday's awesome presentation from Bilgi Karan from IKEA, where he was talking about designing for the real needs of real people. So if you missed that yesterday, definitely go check out Startup Day's YouTube channel and you can find the link to this presentation there. You don't want to miss that because he had some really good tips how to integrate physical and digital design. Or the design of digital and physical products. So there are some really good key points. Now, coming back to UX Tartu. So for those who missed the event yesterday, I have to go through some formal steps. So before we go to our today's presentation. And first of all, it's the 4th time UX Tartu is happening. And it's an official side event of Startup Day. And can you believe that Startup Day is already going to happen for the 5th time next year, 2021, during 27th to 29th of January. So please mark down your calendars. Startup Day is definitely going to happen. Today's topic, or the topic of today's UX Tartu, is designing for real life. As I said, you need to be at Startup Day because Startup Day is producing these startup talks to you, and also we're doing this together with Velvet, and also this awesome production is brought to you by RGB Baltic, and we're also supported by Startup Estonia. So, you understand, I have to mention our dear partners who are making possible for this event to happen, because so far we have dedicated ourselves to bring this event to you for free, only this time. And that's why we really want you to know who are supporting us in this journey. Now let's go to Brella. Brella is the place to be when you want to participate full-time, fully, wholly, holistically in this event series here during this week. So what you can do in Brella, matchmaking. You want to get matched to these people who are important to you, who do matter for your designer career, or who you want to talk to. So get the most out of Brella's AI, which will give you the insights or some sort of tips who to contact with. And you will have this chance after each day's presentation for 2 hours. You can try out the matchmaking, and then afterwards you have 24/7 to talk to this person in this chat box. What else can you do in Brella? You can ask your questions. So all the questions you have for the presenter, then ask them there. We will later pick those awesome questions, and please be specific what you want to ask, because otherwise I will just skip this question. I have this, this power of choosing the good questions. What else you can do in Brella? So you have a virtual demo area there where all these partners I mentioned, Startup Day, Startup Estonia, Velvet, RGB Baltic, they are all there. And there are other companies, other startups who have open job positions. You definitely want to go and check out all these companies and these opportunities there. All right, what else? What else? Something important, I don't want to miss a thing here. Let's see, virtual demo area. Then, of course, I think one of the things, coming back to the fact that this event is for free, we really invite you kindly to donate to Estonian Blind Association. You can find all the details also in the virtual demo area in Brella. And you can do the donation via PayPal or via traditional bank transfer. So please support Estonian Blind Association. Okay, now let's move on to the program. As I mentioned earlier, yesterday we had Bilgi Karan from IKEA. You can find his presentation from our Startup Day YouTube channel. And now, before going to today's presentation, then tomorrow we are going to have Sami Niemelä, on Thursday Jakob Rosin, and on Friday Jamshid Alamuti. Each presentation will last 40 minutes. Then you have actually, you need to ask your questions during this presentation because it's very hard for me to, prepare for the proper QA session when your questions come afterwards. But I will use a pad in order to get also these questions. But please, please, please be kind to me and ask your questions during the presentation. Then I can have like a really nice discussion there later in the QA session. Now, so we are actually there to give the virtual round of applause to Jordan Valdma, who is coming on stage. I hope that you're putting a lot of claps in the chatbot, in the chat box in Brella. So Jordan Valdma is from Producement, which is a customer-centric, pay attention, customer-centric engineering company. And he's actually wearing many hats. So he's an angel investor, did you know? So all those who have some good design idea, maybe you can pitch him later. Maybe you can use the matchmaking area to contact him. You will never know when you can meet this guy. He's also an engineer, and he's also organizing one of the biggest web conferences here in the region. So I'm really glad to invite on the Jordan on the virtual floor, and he's going to tell you about how to build products fast.
All right, let's get started with this session. My name is Jordan Valdma. I'm the CEO of Producement, and we're going to talk about building products fast. So my background is that I've been working with a lot of startups like TransferWise, Pactum, Salv, Sunly, Promoti, etc. And we're gonna take this talk from idea to MVP. So if you ask a person, which is, by the way, one of the hiring interview questions that I often ask, is how to get from idea stage to having an MVP on the market. So and then the people might describe something like this. First, you have customer chats. If you want to say it in a fancy way, if you like Steve Blank, then you can call these customer discovery chats. Second, out of those chats, you distill for yourself a value proposition. And in order to understand if the value proposition can work, you will create a prototype. Once you have created a prototype, you will start user testing the prototype. If the user tests are encouraging and the customers say that, yes, I would like to buy this product, then sometimes if you're dealing with enterprise sales or corporates, you can get a letter of intent. And in the consumer space, thinking about websites like Kickstarter, you can just have pre-orders. This is a very, very good place to be in if your prototype actually generates enough interest that people want to buy your product even before you have it. Once you have that level of commitment from your users, you could build an MVP. So let's look at how to go through this cycle in an optimal way. So we're gonna separate it into 3 tracks. The first track is value proposition, which should answer the question, why and who would use your product? The second track will be the user experience, how to deliver the product in the most efficient way. And the third will be about shipping, basically answering the question if the product is feasible to be built. So the thing to remember here is that you should start with all of these three tracks at the same time. Now, let's talk about value proposition. The introductory fact from Startup Genium report. By the way, if you haven't read the report, then it's one of the must-read things. So the introductory fact is founders overestimate the value of their intellectual property before product market fit by 255%. So that means that whatever value proposition you think you have generated, usually the founders will overestimate. So testing with the customers and testing with the market is super, super important. And let's look at how to do that. So the concept of problem solution domain. First, you would need to establish if there is a problem fit. This means assessing the severity or pain of the problem and looking if customers are already searching for solutions and would they be willing to pay for a solution. Maybe they will say straight away, like, just hand me the solution, I'm ready to pay. And it's important that you keep the distance between the problem fit and the solution fit. The solution should be something that you generate in order to solve the problem. And while going through these cycles of generating the problem solution fit, you should remember that there is a multiplicity of solutions. So what people often do to try to understand the different solutions that they could go through is they might map out the key hypotheses, what they want to test, and the key assumptions, which will be the basis of your model or your business plan. And there are a bunch of good tools to map out your problem solution domain. People often use Lean Canvas, which is in this slide below. Now, while working with the problem solution domain, you really got to dig deep into the problem first, trying to understand what does your target segment go through in terms of day-to-day activities, where do they spend the most time, what are the most problematic or costly issues for them, and do this even before trying to generate any solutions. And once you create the solutions, like a common way to do this is you map out, let's say, like 10 lean canvases or business model canvases, and then pick 1, 2, or 3 of them and try to work in iterations, trying to make them better and better until you might find that you want to test out maybe 2, run experiments on maybe 2 solutions. So how to gauge the amount of interest that customers might possibly have in your solution? Are there enough customers out there interested in what you offer? A very common way to do this is to create a landing page MVP and collect signups. I guess you have also seen the landing pages or maybe even built them where you just describe the value proposition of your product and ask the users to leave their contact. Leaving a contact is kind of a hassle. It's already something that the user kind of gives a commitment to, and you can start kind of understanding the interest of the users. One of the ways to use these tools is that when you see that, let's say, 1,000 users come to your landing page MVP and maybe 50 or 100 leave their emails, this would mean that you can have a conversion rate assessment that perhaps the baseline conversion of your product could be 10% at least from the landing page, which is pretty good. So next way to do this is to create interested communities, creating events, Facebook groups, or any other social media groups and seeing the engagement. If people engage with your product ideas or they get the message they get the mission you are behind, then this is one way to validate that people are actually interested in what you have to offer. Another common way is surveys. You create forms, send it out to your sample set of people, or you do classical market research type of a thing. But very often creating landing page MVPs and iterating on them is a very, very good start. So when you go about those activities in order to understand if customers are interested in your value proposition, it's super important to establish the success failure criteria. Remember that the experiment is not useful without knowing when it ends. You basically don't want to get stuck in the zombie land of companies that are half living, half dead. Maybe they have been around for a few years and haven't really gotten any growth of traction. Think through really clearly if the product you're trying to build is worth your time. Because remember, there is always opportunity cost. If you're building product A full time, then you don't have the time to build product B. And in order to generate the success and failure criteria, examples could be conversion rates. You do some kind of prototypes or landing pages and expect people to convert just based on your value proposition description. If the conversion rate is less than your threshold, easy. Throw this particular iteration of the value proposition away. You could do absolute number of orders, like previously mentioned. Kickstart is a good example. Maybe you have some kind of a manufacturing line to set up, and you say, okay, when I pre-sell 5,000 items, I get enough cash to set up all my operations and to deliver the product. Another example could be if you're building enterprise software, then you might say, if I get a partnership with some kind of a corporation, then I'm good to actually build this MVP out. And while going through these steps, remember to be data-driven. So there is a common theme in thinking about data-drivenness, and it's focused on one metric at a time. There's a good book, if you haven't read it, it's called Lean Analytics. It's kind of like in the series of lean startups and building a great company, like Eric Ries and Alistair Cole, these kinds of people. And why the recommendation of focusing on one metric at a time? Obviously, you cannot optimize everything at once. So if your company is just starting out, you probably want to optimize for growth. Like you probably don't want to optimize, for example, for retention, because you're just trying to see if there is a sustainable business model or some kind of attraction for your particular product idea. So a good metric is comparative, understandable. It's usually a ratio or a rate. For example, people often talk in terms of growth month over month, which means how much your growth accelerated every month. This is a way to understand if your growth is going to be exponential in terms of like having a linear growth. And obviously, if you do a startup, then you want to have exponential growth. And of course, the metric should be actionable. This means that whatever you measure, you need to be able to make decisions on top of it. Like, for example, if you measure vague things like happiness of people, then it's very difficult to make decisions. What should I do? What should I do in specific to make people more happy? very difficult problem. Some people want carrots, other want cakes, so on and so forth. Okay, one of the things that you will definitely need to gauge when you are working with value proposition is pricing. How valuable is the product for the customers? And you do this by user testing, for example. When you have built your prototype and you're running your regular user tests, which we will pay attention to in the next slides as well, then one of the things to ask in the end of the user tests is, would you be willing to pay for this kind of a product? And users will give you amounts. Of course, you cannot expect that they are correct 100%. Sometimes you need to verify by actually getting a commitment from the users that you are user testing with, commitment in terms of real money, to see if what they say and their actions are in conjunction. And it can happen that people actually say yes, or say that, no, I'll just wait for you guys to actually build it before I give you any of my money. But anyways, you will reach some kind of a number, and then you need to figure out if you can make the economics work with a given value. Try to prognose the customer acquisition cost and the lifetime value, and see if it's sustainable. Usually the benchmark is about 1 to 3 customer acquisition cost and customer lifetime value to build a sustainable business. This is a good start. And also mentioned, can you get people to pre-order or pre-commit with their money, or can you sell your prototype already to some kind of a bigger company via letter of intent or a letter of interest? Now we're coming to the point about pivoting, and the fact here is that startups that pivot once or twice raise 2.5x more money, have 3.6x better user growth, and are 52% less likely to scale prematurely than startups that pivot more than 2 times or not at all. So when building products, then junior teams I've seen getting stuck in their particular solution proposal super often, trying to spend half a year or a year without any growth or actual positive feedback from the users, while senior teams, experienced entrepreneurs, are super happy to throw away their MVPs after 2 weeks of testing. And some of the companies that we have worked with have done that. So keep in mind that pivoting is super important. Don't be afraid to kill your babies. This is just part of the job. Now to the UX section, or the UX track. Startups need 2 to 3 times longer to validate their market than most founders expect. This underestimation creates the pressure to scale prematurely. So when people talk about premature scaling, then what they refer to is startup getting stuck in their particular solution and spending money to build out that solution. There is a saying that VC money is like rocket fuel. First, you want to aim your rocket to the right direction before you raise actual VC capital, because most likely you will use the money not to iterate that much anymore, but to scale out the solution, to fly the rocket. So be super careful not to get into the trap of scaling prematurely, but taking the time to go through the iterations and validating the market before going in, putting big sums of money into advertising and so on and so forth. So let's look at a few methodologies on how to do that in the UX department. So the first easy one is prototyping that I expect all of you have done to a degree. And what this means basically is it should answer the question of how does the user engage with the product. So remember that the prototype is a device for learning about the market. It's a device for learning about the users, for learning about if your particular proposed way to deliver your value proposition is good. Tools that are often used for this are likes of InVision, Figma, Proto.io, etc. One of the key parts of prototyping is copy and messaging. I remember I've been building a bunch of finance products, and a regular person from the street might even not know what a fund is. This is like completely normal. And sometimes we as product builders are so involved in our domains that we forget to validate if the concepts that we are even discussing about are understandable. So be really critical about the copy. If you're dealing with a tech product, then this necessarily doesn't mean that you have to prototype with InVision or Figma. For example, if you have some kind of a product that does machine-to-machine communication, then your UX prototype can be an API specification, and you work with it the same way. Only maybe this time your segment that you're testing with are the engineers. You'll send them the API specs or try to build some kind of a mock interfaces with mock data and ask your counterparties to consume them before building out any kind of an MVP. Again, techniques just to save yourself some time. So next, let's talk about user testing. This is invaluable. You're trying to basically answer the question if it is what you're building, is it a good user interface? I think have been a lot of discussions about user testing already, so I won't go too deep into it. How we do it is basically the products we are building. We start user testing basically from the day one, and we have user testers coming in a couple of times a week, 2 or 3 user testers. So for us, having like 4 or 5 user testers on one particular product per week is a norm, and a handful of user testers are enough for an iteration. Usually the users notice the same things and get stuck in the same areas and have the same kind of questions. So when you do user testing on Tuesday with 4 or 5 people, then and you create another iteration for Friday, when you ask another 4 or 5 people to come in, then you can iterate and prototype really quickly. And users don't have to come into your office. During last few months, we have done a lot of user testing purely via Google Hangouts and Zoom calls. And of course, if you can go outside, then doing guerrilla user testing, just hitting up random people on the street and asking questions, like giving them your MVP application and asking, what is this? Can you tell me what it does? What is it supposed to do? And if they understand it, would you like to use it? What's missing? And it's important not to explain anything to the users. I know this might be obvious stuff, but there is an urge. If user gets stuck, to help the user out, but instead of helping the user out, just take some notes and ask the user, okay, now you got stuck, what would you like to do, or how do you think you would solve your problem right now? Because remember, you want to have the user in there as natural an environment as possible. And of course, ask the users to think out loud. Otherwise, you have nothing to base your notes and comments on. Okay, this was about user testing, so let's talk about conversion funnels. Also, very, very powerful tool. This is a figure that basically displays a funnel, and in a traditional marketing sense, we have been thinking in terms of stages in the user mind, basically, the stages that the user goes through when onboarding to a product, like awareness, consideration, preference, intent, and purchase. And how people use these, there's like multiple ways. One of the common ones is what's going through user's head in every step. For example, when user was not aware that they had some kind of a problem, and then this problem came into their awareness, how did it happen? Like, let's take, for example, Spotify. People used to play MP3 players, and they noticed that the memory gets full, and they would like to maybe use something online from a phone instead of carrying another device, so on and so forth. What are the thoughts that they're going through when considering the different alternatives, and etc. And in online products, we often track same kind of funnels in a very concrete steps, like site visit, product view, adding the product to cart, entering the checkout, and making the purchase. Of course, the way you track it depends very much on the product at hand, but idea is to track every step that the user goes through in the journey of using your product. So this screen basically shows an example from a Mixpanel, how Mixpanel dashboard displays conversion funnels. And Mixpanel is, for us as well, one of the de facto tools that we use, super useful. And an example could be that the user comes to the landing page. There are 69,000 users, and most of them drop off. Only 21% proceed to the next step, which is some kind of a product view. And now we start analyzing the steps that the user goes through and which are the steps that you can optimize. And so basically, conversion funnel helps you with measuring the user experience and the value proposition. If the user experience is bad, users are very prone to zoning out in terms of closing the tab or closing their browser, and you actually see if the value proposition that you display is strong enough for the user to have a strong intent in order to proceed. If you know the conversion of your product, then you can predict the success or growth. If your steady conversion rate in a segment, for example, is 10%, then you just know the customer acquisition cost, and you can basically buy advertising, do paid advertising. So there's no point in doing paid advertising before you have actually optimized your conversion funnel. Otherwise, you get a lot of traffic that just goes into trash. You optimize your conversion funnel first, then you can predict, okay, if I funnel in next 10,000 users, 10,000 of them will be my customers. This was an example. And of course, finding conversion blockers. Sometimes there are bugs, sometimes very common. There are trust issues, for example, in finance domain. Is this site a scam or this site is a trustworthy? And then trying to solve those conversion blockers. What you want to look for when working with the funnels is, for example, the time elapsed between the steps. This will give you a very good indication if you can optimize something. For example, if you have a wall of text instead of a simple graph, then user might spend time reading the text, and with each second that the user spends time reading the text, the probability that they will click next will drop. Checking out the cohorts. If users are using some kind of feature X but not Y, then you might have some kind of a cohort that, for example, advanced users or junior users that you can work with separately to make their value proposition stronger. And of course, segments like slices of users, for example, desktop users, mobile users, they have different expectations. Okay, some tips about conversion funnels. Remember, these are just examples to get your ideas and creative choices flowing. There's a lot of good literature about working with the funnels and building hooking products and things that employ behavioral hacks and psychology to get people engaged. But some random examples are provide value early. For example, show content of the site before logging in. Like if you go to a task management app, you probably can write tasks into Trello, for example, before you need to sign up. You only need to sign up when you want to save something. So this means that instead of displaying a form to sign up as the first thing, which is a huge conversion drop, it will allow the user to start using the product straight away. And then when they actually want to save something or use the product in a more extensive way, only then you bring up the form. Push back any unnecessary steps. In the finance domain, very common example is KYC, which stands for Know Your Customer, and it often happens that up to a limit, the user can do transactions, for example, with an online bank or some kind of service without needing to take a picture of their passport and to display the KYC pop-ups only when necessary. Remember that basically with every step in the conversion funnel, there will be a drop-off. So the less steps that you have, the bigger is the conversion. And of course, don't forget about dopamine and gamification mechanisms that run in our brains. Basically the stuff that Facebook and Instagram is built on. People constantly want to get that another hit of a like or see some kind of content that excites them, and it seemingly they don't get enough of it ever. And this is purely like mechanisms based on dopamine. So do research this if you are building a social type of a product. So a bit about virality and word of mouth. So basically the idea is that users spread the word by themselves. This is for word of mouth to work, you need to have a strong foundation, meaning that there is a sufficient level of satisfaction from the product. One of the metrics that you can measure this with is NPS. and that users have your back in terms of trust and commitment. In terms of like good way to look at this is your App Store reviews. If there are complaints in or any reviews, Trustpilot or just purely the customer support letters that you have, can you solve the problems that users are complaining about via workarounds or just like implementing new features and iterating? Second idea here is that you can do indirect advertising, like TransferWise. At TransferWise we did stunts like running half naked in the streets of London or other campaigns that had a lot of attention, teaser campaigns and so on. And you can do direct management as well, which is basically paid word of mouth via agents and kind of like referral and these types of schemes. And of course you want to have a very large share of word of mouth, which is purely organic, meaning people talk to people, because then you don't have to do so much paid advertising. And there's all sorts of hacks to build virality into your product, but once you get the virality coefficient greater than 1, then you're in a very good place, because your product basically grows without you needing to do any additional actions. So virality is one of the holy grails in the exponential curve. Of course, later in your product building journey, you might want to start looking at retention. On the left, there is an example screenshot from a Mixpanel retention sheet, where you can see the user using the product at some given date and then using it again n days later, and making sure that your product is sticky, meaning that users came back on their own initiative. And there is this idea that the engagement drives stickiness. So there's a study done 15 years ago, which is pretty famous, called Zero Defections Quality Come to Service, which was published in the Harvard Business Review, and it showed that increasing customer retention rates by 5% increased profits by 25 to 95%. So having a recurring users and having good retention is key when you're not thinking about anymore so much about growth but profitability, and trying to make sure that your business model works well, optimizing this customer lifetime value part of the equation. And as Sequoia Capital put it, basically the plan comes together. I love it when the plan comes together. Engagement drives stickiness, drives retention, drives growth. And there are a few metrics that you can follow up on the Sequoia Capital blog later. So just recapping what we discussed, basically getting the customers, activating them, keeping them in terms of retention, maybe doing upselling, and eventually turning them into referrals, driving that viral loop. So remember to iterate. Founders that learn are more successful. Startups that have helpful mentors track metrics effectively and learn from startups through leaders raise 7x more money and have 3.5x better user growth. This is one of the, I think, main things that VCs and funds are looking for when they decide whether to invest into a particular startup or not. Is the startup coachable? Are they iterating? Are they tracking their metrics? Can they actually learn from the market? You might have a very good idea, but if you have a kind of a team that is not capable of learning from the market, then there's slim chance to success. So iteration is super important. Okay, so this section is a little bit more interesting perhaps to technical minded people, and this basically idea is shipping. So premature scaling is the most common reason for startups to perform worse. They tend to lose the battle early on by getting ahead of themselves. So let's look at how to make sure whatever you build it in a lean way and don't spend too much time building something that is not used. So obvious prioritization. The way we basically prioritize in all of the projects is priority of a given feature is customer impact divided by the effort. And obviously you want to do the things that are high in impact and low in effort, and you don't want to do the things that are high in effort and low in impact. If you don't know the impact of your feature, easy, don't do it, skip it. This kind of a thinking, being ruthless about it, helps your team focus very well. If somebody from the team flies in and says, okay, we need to color this red button yellow, but they cannot back up their claim in terms of like, what is the real impact, then the other team members can say with ease, okay, we don't know the impact of this. It doesn't make sense to do it. Of course, there's ways to quantify the impact. For example, if there's a bug, you can say how many users are affected by the bug. If there are some complaints on the product, you can say we have had this many customer support queries on this item, or if just you have X amount of users who have asked for a new feature, or maybe you can measure it in money. And of course, if you prioritize and build the features, you should understand very clearly how these features affect your KPIs. Are you doing them for conversion? Are you doing them to acquire new markets? Are you doing them to work with retention, like users who are already on the product and you want to make their experience better, and so on and so forth. So have targets in that sense when you prioritize your features. This is an easy one. Use out-of-the-box tooling. Using convention-based tooling will get you started quickly. Like nowadays, it's pretty easy. You can use landing page creators, design frameworks like Bootstrap, using infrastructure cloud providers like Google Cloud and AWS. We always set up continuous integration from the beginning so that there will be no manual work, even while doing 2-day MVP sprints or something like that. And of course, if you set up all of those things, then you allow new members to onboard to your team very quickly. If you have unconventional tooling or unconventional stack, then onboarding new members is much more difficult. And let's talk a little bit about the Mechanical Turk operations. So Mechanical Turk it's just a story about some guy a few centuries ago claiming to have this robot that plays chess. So nowadays it's not particularly a miracle, but at those times it was pretty phenomenal. It was a box which had a few cogs and wires in it, and then a hidden part as well. And then the guy walked around in fairs and toured the magical box that played chess against a live opponent. And eventually they found out when the guy passed away that the box was pretty much empty, and supposedly there was a Turk in the machine that was actually operating the knobs and the chessboard pieces. So a lot of startups do manual operations before trying to scale anything. Don't spend time building your backend while you're still validating your idea. Only start optimizing and scaling your solution when you actually cannot grow without building the software. Until then, a common example is using Google Forms, type forms, spreadsheets. I was recently MVPing like a marketplace solution, and it was enough to use a spreadsheet and connect different parties in the marketplace based on a simple form. No need to build any software just yet. Focus on the front end. So front end is basically the most important in terms of testing what it will look like, and outsource the services if you need to. Outsource the operations to freelancers or mTurk and so on and so forth. And again, automate only when you need to scale. So now, let's quickly go over what is called 4 key metrics. The idea here is that sometimes the teams or the engineering teams or the whole product teams say that we cannot go quickly because we want to build like a stable foundation, and actually this is a fallacy. What the research shows is that stability equals speed. So 4 key metrics. The result of a multi-year research published in Accelerate demonstrates a direct link between organizational performance and software delivery performance. The researchers have determined that only 4 key metrics differentiate between low, medium, and high performers. So the performers in terms of providing or delivering value to the customers. So first of the 4 key metrics is lead time. Time from code being committed to being used in the production. High performers can deliver results in less than an hour. So this is why we always set up, for example, the continuous integration from day one. We don't want to do this stuff manually. That is repetitive. Deployment frequency. High performers release code multiple times per day. Basically, releasing code means that the engineers and the product team members who built the feature get feedback to their feature. So releasing changes means learning. If you are not releasing changes every day or often, you are not learning quickly enough. That's the takeaway. Mean time to restore, not so important perhaps in the early days of a startup, but idea is that failures are expected, but quick recovery is the key. High performance recovery in less than an hour. So basically, whenever you can set up rollback mechanisms if there is a bug, and so on and so forth. And change fail percentage, 4th key metric. Service impairment or outage whenever there's a need for a hotfix or rollback. And high performers have 0 to 15% of fails, which means that if you release 10 times and one of your releases is buggy or needs some kind of help or immediate fix, then you're still doing okay. So this is like good ratio between moving fast and breaking things in that sense. So these were the 4 key metrics. And lastly, don't forget that people equals product. This is a cool saying, and the idea here is that balanced teams with 1 technical founder and 1 business founder raise 30% more money, have 2.9x more user growth, and are 19% less likely to scale prematurely than technical or business-heavy founding teams. So try to get that mesh of competencies that are helpful to each other. So key takeaways from this session: work in parallel. Start working with value proposition, UX and engineering track straight away, all at once. Iterate and user test on all fronts. Value prop iteration and user testing just by showing people your value proposition in whatever way, like a landing page or a document or a presentation, getting feedback. Starting with the UX, trying to build your prototype in InVision or Figma or Bootstrap and getting feedback on it, and starting to test the parts of the code that you are unsure of in terms of feasibility. Are they doable? Building very, very tiny proof of concepts to get that confidence that when you want to automate or launch something, you're ready. Establishing the success and failure criteria, not to get stuck in the so-called zombie land of companies that never grow but suck out the time and life of the teams behind them. If your product doesn't grow, pivot, iterate, or switch to some kind of a new value proposition or a new problem domain. Do the manual operations while you can, and lastly, the stability equals speed. So most successful founders are driven by impact rather than experience or money. So create an impact in the world. Be great. Thank you. My name is Jordan Valdma. You can get in contact by jordan@producement.com. Thanks for listening. Have fun.
Jordan, amazing. That was an amazing presentation. I was like, because I've been building startups since 2010, and I was like, getting a quick review in 45-50 minutes of startup manual, which is a very thick book. So I think that, all the people in the audience, they will just use your presentation as a very nice recap of all the really important aspects when building products fast and really getting them to the hands of end users. So I'm blown away. It's like really hard to even find the holes in your presentation to ask questions about, but there are some. So I hope that we have a little bit of time, a couple of minutes. So I will ask, maybe this is pretty important, like how should you approach all this regarding B2B products or financial products where there are like some security needs? So what is your takeaway regarding different industries?
Yeah. So I think it's pretty important to talk with the people in the industry already, like in the finance, for example. If you're building products for banks, then establish some kind of sign-offs with them before you actually build or start building the products, meaning in terms of like, well, a recent example is that banks expect the finance products to be SOC 2 compliant, and SOC 2 is like a big list of security issues. And of course, when it's like this was a B2B example, but if it's a consumer example and you're building something like Dropbox, for example, it's important to understand what are the user expectations to the security in terms of like, do they require encryption or are they trusting you just because you have some kind of a partnership with, I know if you say that you host your files on AWS, is it enough for them or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good point. Thank you, Jordan. I have some really cool questions, but we are out of time, and unfortunately, I have to end my questionnaire here. So thank you again, okay, Jordan, and definitely people go back to our YouTube channel under Startup Day to get Jordan's presentation and go back and forth. I don't know how many times to get all the necessary information is there. Thank you. And now let's wrap up today's day. Again, important things regarding UX Tartu, that it is a free event and we are supported by Startup Day, Startup Estonia, Velvet, and all the production is done by the awesome team from RGB Baltic. Tomorrow, also to donations. So although the event is free, please donate to Estonian Blind Association. Every cent basically counts. I know it sounds cliche and lame, but it does. So find this resource for them. And also matchmaking. Go to Brella. Use the time there to do proper matchmaking now. After basically you have 2 hours to do that, to find the leads. And as Jordan said, he's also happy to give out his contacts. So take advantage of that. And we will be coming back tomorrow to hear Sami Niemelä from Nordcup, a really experienced designer who will be bringing some tips from his experience. So meet you here tomorrow. Bye-bye. Tap. Tap.